We will not make a full frame camera. We will not make a full frame camera. We'll never make a full frame camera. We will not make a full frame camera. We won't make a full frame camera. We will not make a full frame camera. We don't need full frame. We will never make a full frame
What
camera.
is going down, you awesome, voracious, and super salacious camera geeks? Happy New Year 2025. Another year older, but none the wiser. All right, so you guys may be wondering what that intro was all about. Now, for you hardcore Nikonians, Nikon, for you hardcore Nikonians, I think you guys know the story all too well. But for the rest of you guys, we're going to talk about this today. First, let me ask you guys, new or old or in between, what do you think is the most important Nikon camera? I'm going to say Nikon in this episode because I live in the USA and that's the way they say it. All right. But what do you guys think is the most important Nikon digital camera? All right. Well, for many people, it's probably going to be this camera right here. Okay. This is the Nikon D1. All right. From 1999. And this camera was the first Nikon digital SLR. So as we all know, guys, anything that's the first is usually the one that's most remembered and perhaps the most important. But today's camera that I have for you guys, today's camera legend, is one of those rare cameras that really made a big impact when it came out. And in my opinion, it may actually be even more important than the Nikon D1. And I'll tell you about that later on. But the camera legend we're talking about today needs no introduction. The camera legend that we are talking about today is the one and only Nikon D3. All right, you guys. Well, if you guys don't know the story, this camera right here, the Nikon D3, is Nikon's first full-frame digital SLR. Okay. Now, this camera was released in 2007, and it made a huge splash back in 2007 as Nikon's first full-frame FX, they call it, digital SLR. And why was it such a big deal? Because, and here's the story that we were leading up to from the intro. For years and years, ever since the introduction of the Nikon D1, Nikon had insisted that they would not be making a full-frame camera that DX or APS-C 1.5 crop factor. That DX is where it's at for them. And they were using all the same reasons that we hear from Micro Four Thirds, that they could design digitally optimized lenses for that crop sensor, that it was sharper, all that kind of stuff. But in 2007, they went ahead and did it, and they came out with the Nikon D3. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a modern masterpiece. It is the Nikon D3, introduced in 2007. At the heart of the camera is a 12.1 megapixel FX full-frame CMOS sensor. Now, for many years, Nikon had insisted that they were sticking to their DX APS-C format and they would not be going full-frame. And back in those days, full-frame digital SLRs were few and far in between and quite expensive. Let's take a look at the beginnings of the full-frame revolution. Now, in those early days, digital cameras were quite expensive. Even this Olympus C3000 Zoom, which was my first digital camera, cost me $700 brand new. And I shudder to think that it costs about $10 today. So back in those early days, from my recollection, most of us camera geeks were just expecting more and more and more megapixels. A full-frame digital SLR seemed far off the radar. But this all changed with the release of the Contax N Digital in 2002. The Contax N Digital is the world's first 35mm full-frame digital SLR. And while this camera had so much potential, it was plagued with many problems and it was pulled quite early on from the market. And so it wasn't until the release of the Canon EOS 1DS, also in 2002, that the world began to see what a full-frame digital SLR was capable of. But unfortunately, the high prices, and from what I remember, the fact that it was always in demand by professional photographers kept it out of the hands of the masses. Now, the 1DS also had its share of imaging issues, such as high noise in the images and unusable high ISO values. Now, the third great full-frame digital SLR that we have comes from 2003, and this is the Kodak DCS Pro 14N. And this camera, I believe, is truly for the technical camera geek, because while it is capable of producing some stunning images, but to get stunning images from this camera, one would have to work within a very narrow range of parameters. Low ISOs, there's no such thing as high ISOs on this camera. Anything above 400 looks horrible, and slow, clumsy, and clunky to use. But should you put the time into this camera, you can produce superb images. Now, the high price tag and the clunky operations of this camera pretty much kept it out of the hands of the masses. So based solely on the first three 35mm full-frame digital SLRs that we just saw right there, I don't think Nikon had any real compelling reason to go full-frame. But the introduction of the next camera in 2005 changed everything. The Canon EOS 5D Classic was introduced by Canon in 2005, and at the time of its introduction, it was the most affordable full-frame DSLR on the market, and in fact, it was one of the very few full-frame digital SLRs on the market at that time. Its enthusiast-friendly price tag and critically acclaimed image quality raised the bar and showed the world what a full-frame digital SLR was capable of, and it became a favorite of the people. So what are the supposed benefits of a full-frame sensor? Okay, first thing is your lenses are what they are supposed to be. For example, a 20mm lens is a 20mm lens. You don't have to multiply that by 1.5 or 1.6. Secondly, a full-frame sensor should have lower noise. Third, a full-frame sensor should have better high ISO performance. Now, there's a lot more to it, but I think the one thing that might matter to most people, or to many people, is that you should be getting a lot more bokeh-licious images. Okay, well, the most obvious claim to fame for the Nikon D3 is its FX full-frame sensor. Now, I am not here to try to convince you as to whether or not the full-frame look is real. I happen to believe that it is, but I do understand if you do not believe that you absolutely need a full-frame camera. That said, on a full-frame sensor, it will be much easier to get shallow depth of field with whatever lens you are using, and that is the beauty of the full-frame sensor. The D3 is not just about shallow depth of field, it's about excellent fouls, beautiful night shots that in the past have seemed impossible. And the D3 is a workhorse. It is a professional workhorse, and I used it for that purpose back in the day, and it delivered. Okay, so this is one of those cameras where you can totally rely on for professional work. And just like this classic Rolleiflex, the Nikon D3 has in and of itself become a modern classic. And it takes absolutely gorgeous images. Whether you're shooting in the day, in the night, low light, or on stage, this camera will deliver the goods. with superb image quality that holds up even today. Alright, so what do you guys think about this extraordinary Nikon camera all these years later? Let me know, leave it in comments. Let me know what you think if you had the D3, if you have the D3, if you've used the D3 in a professional setting, in a non-professional setting, whatever your opinion of the Nikon D3 is. I would love to hear about it from you guys. All right, now, I got this camera actually in 2009 used, okay? And here's the thing, right? Once again, I don't think I really needed it. My main camera at the time was the 5D Classic, which I used for, anything that was important, any professional gig or anything I deemed important. But when this camera was released in 2007, okay, 12.1 megapixels was already beginning to be a little underpowered. But as I've shown you in the sample images, the images coming out of this camera were like on a different level. And that's why so many pros went for this camera, not just because it was the first Nikon full frame. I mean, that alone is enough reason for a lot of people, but because of the fact that the image quality was so stellar back then that it made the switch, more easy to digest. Okay, now when I got it in 2009, I got it used, and I dropped a good $2.5 grand for it. Nowadays, if you guys are looking for this camera, you could find them for as low as $250, and I've seen them even lower than that. But these are for like heavily used, models up to, so the prices are trending from around $250 to about $450, let's say. You can get even better performance with the Nikon D3S, which will run you about $450 to $500, which is still considered one of the best low light digital SLRs of all time. And think of it this way, a lot of people still love the A7S series, A7S1, A7S2, A7S3. And as you guys know, those cameras all use a 12 megapixel sensor, okay? And that camera is the Nikon D700. All right, so here's the thing though. If you look at almost, and I've reviewed this camera too, if you look through my pages here, I've actually reviewed this camera along with the 5D Classic. Okay, but if you look at almost every YouTube review on the Nikon D700, you'll always see something like Nikon D700, the legend. All right, and it is definitely a camera legend. But in my head, I was always thinking, well, if the D700 is the legend and it's basically a baby D3, then what does that make the D3? Is it the granddaddy legend? Is it the big daddy legend? Or is it, as Nikon calls it, an immediate legend? All right. So if you're choosing between these two cameras, it's a little bit of a hard call. Basically, the main differences are that the D3 could do more frames per second. I believe like 9 frames per second. I'm not exactly sure about the D700, but I know that with the booster on, the D700 can do about 8 frames per second, which I think they just crippled it on purpose, just not to cannibalize the sales for the D3. Image quality, they're exactly the same. All right, so in many ways, the D700 is actually a better buy because, let's face it, one of the big caveats of this camera, the D3, okay, one of the real main issues of this camera is simply, and this is a big issue, it's simply because it is big. Okay, look at this thing right here. This is a big brute, a big and beautiful brute of a camera. Okay, so while the D1 may have led the Nikon digital revolution in 1999, the success of the D3 absolutely rejuvenated the company. This camera may have actually saved the company. It brought back many professional photographers, it brought in new customers, and it set a new standard in image quality. Many people bought the D3 for the image quality alone. It could be argued that the D3 gave birth to the modern Nikon look, and that all the Nikon Pro DSLRs the D4, the D5, the DF, up to the most current Nikon Z9 mirrorless flagship, have really just built upon the image quality standards set by the Nikon D3. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Oh, I forgot, there's no video on here. There is a primitive live view function, which is okay for fun, but nothing to get excited about. But it signaled what was ahead, and the image quality, as I said, is the main thing. Is the main power of the Nikon D3 in my personal opinion. All right, so I hope you guys got something out of this, and if you did, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Share the video. Help me grow this channel. This channel is dedicated to bringing you guys back the greatest camera legends of all time, and wherever possible, whenever possible, I'll try to give you authentic memories of these cameras, because I'm getting old. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, let's take a beautiful 2007 era image of you guys with superb color, tonality, and amazing image quality that is the Nikon D3. At the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And I will catch you guys next time on thecameralegend.com. Is it time to retire that? All right. I'll catch you guys next time on thecameralegend.com YouTube.